9 million. Just take a second and try to imagine the sheer scale of 9 million lives. That staggering, somber number represents the soldiers who died during the First World War. It's a heavy thought, I know, but it is absolutely the foundation of our story today. Entire cities were literally reduced to ruins. The world was exhausted, grieving, and completely desperate to make sure a great war would never, ever happen again. And you know what? It was out of that unimaginable trauma that a radical new idea was born.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the story of the League of Nations. It's a tragic, heroic, and honestly, an absolutely necessary stepping stone in human history. We're going to unpack exactly how this pioneering experiment in global cooperation actually worked, where it scored some stunning, life-saving victories, and, well, why it ultimately collapsed. It's a fascinating blueprint of how our modern world first learned to govern itself. Let's get into it.
Section 1. A Hopeful New World. The Vision for a Post-War Order.
Back in 1919, at the Paris Peace Conference, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson showed up with a pretty revolutionary plan to create a world parliament. His vision was this physical place where global leaders could actually look each other in the eye and talk through their problems, instead of just immediately ordering their armies to march. Now, to cynical politicians who had just barely survived a mechanized, brutal war, Wilson's vision seemed almost laughably naive, like he was just blowing fragile bubbles of pure idealism. But for a broken world, taking that leap of faith was absolutely crucial.
The real beating heart of Wilson's whole plan was this concept called collective security. Think of it like a global neighborhood watch, a promise that if one member nation was attacked, every other member would stand up together to defend them. Alongside pushing for global disarmament and improving overall human welfare, collective security was supposed to be the ultimate deterrent against any future warlords.
Section 2. Building the Flawed Bridge. The Missing Keystone. So the League of Nations was essentially designed like a massive stone bridge. And for a stone bridge to not just collapse, it absolutely needs a central keystone to hold all that weight. The whole world just assumed the United States would be that keystone. But, plot twist, driven by a desire for isolationism to stay out of European drama, fears of spending American tax dollars abroad, and a lingering feeling that the League was just protecting the British and French empires, the U.S. Senate actually voted against joining their own president's creation. By staying home, the U.S. totally deprived the League of the economic and military muscle it desperately needed.
Inside the League's headquarters in Geneva, things were honestly a structural mess. On one side, you had the Assembly, acting as the world's parliament. Every nation got one vote, but decisions required unanimous agreement. Literally, everyone had to agree. Now, this was designed to protect national sovereignty, but practically, it meant one tiny country could block action for the entire globe. Then, on the other side, you had the Council. This was a smaller executive group where permanent members, like Britain, France, Italy, and Japan, held veto power. So if an aggressive permanent member didn't like a plan, they could just legally block it. It was a total recipe for structural paralysis.
If a country did break the rules, the League had this strict three-step escalation plan. Step 1, moral condemnation. Basically, a massive global public scolding. Step 2, economic sanctions. They'd ban the trade of food, coal, and weapons to basically starve the aggressor into behaving. But the fatal flaw was Step 3, military force. The League had absolutely no independent army. None. Zero. To actually enforce that final stage, they had to beg war-tired nations to volunteer their own troops. And yeah, almost nobody was willing to do that.
Section 3. The Golden Age. Solving problems in the 1920s. Despite all those massive structural cracks, the early years were surprisingly hopeful. If we look at the timeline of the 1920s, there were some real tangible victories. In 1921, they managed to settle a really tense dispute between Sweden and Finland over the Åland Islands, completely avoiding a war. That same year, they held a peaceful public vote to fairly divide the disputed Upper Silesia region between Germany and Poland. And get this, in 1925, when Greece invaded Bulgaria after a border skirmish, the League acted instantly, ordered Greece to withdraw, and Greece actually obeyed. It proved this system could effectively mediate disputes and stop localized wars.
Section 4. The Humanitarian Superheroes. Saving millions of lives. Now, beyond all the intense politics, the League was actually a massive, enduring success when it came to everyday global welfare. I mean, they successfully repatriated 400,000 prisoners of war. They created the Nansen Passport so stateless refugees could finally travel safely. They launched huge coordinated health campaigns fighting malaria and leprosy. They literally helped free 200,000 slaves in Sierra Leone. And through the International Labor Organization, they fought for a 48-hour work week and minimum working ages. People love to say the League was a total failure, but in this arena, they were absolute superheroes.
Section 5. Dictators and the Collapse. The Big Power Problem. Unfortunately, those soaring humanitarian winds soon crashed headfirst into a dark political reality. 1929, the Wall Street crash. The Great Depression unleashed massive global poverty, and almost overnight, all that nice international cooperation dissolved into desperate, selfish nationalism. Countries just stopped caring about the collective good. It was all about economic survival. And that desperation paved the exact path for militaristic dictators to take power.
You can really see the crises rapidly escalating. Now, the early warning signs were mostly ignored. When Poland took Vilna in 1920, and when Mussolini's Italy attacked Corfu in 1923, the League kind of just backed down, out of fear. But the true collapse hit in the 1930s. Japan invaded Manchuria, and Italy launched a brutal invasion of Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia. In both of these massive, glaring crises, the League only slapped them with weak economic sanctions. They were absolutely terrified of triggering another global war if they actually confronted the big powers they were supposed to police. And that hesitation, it completely destroyed whatever credibility they had left.
Section 6. The Final Verdict. A limited success.
So it really all comes back to that metaphor of the bridge without a keystone. That perfectly sums up the entire journey we've just taken. We went from the high hopes of Wilson's 14 points to some real actual problem solving in the 1920s. But without the American keystone and without a standing army to enforce the rules, they were tragically unable to stop the dictators of the 1930s. Yes, it was a tragic failure to stop World War II, but at the same time, they achieved something highly significant along the way. If we weigh the final scorecard side by side, it's a pretty complex legacy. On the failure side, yeah, they failed to stop the big powers. The USA never joined. They had no army, and that unanimous voting system practically paralyzed them. But look at the successes. They settled disputes. They saved literally millions of lives through health and refugee work. They championed workers' rights. Most importantly, they proved that international cooperation wasn't just some pipe dream. It was actually mechanically possible.
So, I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. Did the League fail the world, or did the world fail the League? It's absolutely true that it failed to prevent the horrors of the Second World War. But out of the ashes of that exact failure, the League provided the vital, road-tested blueprint for the modern United Nations. And that's an organization that relies on those exact same lessons today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history that builds our present.